Well, welcome, friends, to week 3 of our series, What Did Jesus Really Teach? For 3 weeks, we're looking at this question, to which we really need to have a pretty clear and comprehensive answer if we're going to be people who follow the teachings of Jesus, if we're going to be Christians. Now, fortunately, we have some very good resources to help us answer this question. First, we have the 4 biographies of Jesus found in the New Testament. That's the second part of the Bible. These biographies are called Gospels, and they're named for their traditional authors, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. These biographies or Gospels, they record much of what Jesus taught, or at least what his followers understood him to have taught. And the second resource we have is the abundance of modern biblical scholarship, particularly from the end of the 20th century, which focused on the Gospels and the historical Jesus. Now, from this work, it's become relatively easy to condense the teachings of Jesus into several broad, comprehensive categories. And for the purpose of this series, we've summarized the teachings of Jesus into 3 broad categories. First, Jesus taught that everything is spiritual. Behind the world we can see, touch, and reason about logically, there is a very real, unseen world that surrounds and permeates the physical realm. Now, the source or energizing force of this world, according to both ancient Judaism and Jesus, is God himself. Although this spiritual realm or world is largely unseen, it is very, very real. As Dr. Tony Evans said in the quote we referenced last week, if all you see is what you see, then you do not see all there is to be seen. Staying aware of and connected to this spiritual dimension, which is ultimately being aware of and connected to God, it's why we do the many things we do as Christians. It's why we engage in church services each week. It's why we read the Bible and pray. It's why we involve ourselves in things like small groups. These are all tools and practices that keep us aware of and connected to this greater reality. Without these practices, life is limited largely to what we can see. Now, the second thing Jesus taught was that compassion is the key. Jesus introduced his followers to a new way of marching, a new way of living, a new way to be in the world. And this new way was based on Jesus' understanding of what it meant to imitate God. Now, based on its understanding of holiness, first century Judaism created a culture and society built on division and exclusion, believing that in doing so it was living out the mandate found in the Old Testament book of Leviticus, you must be holy because I, the Lord your God, am holy. Jesus reinterpreted it, what it meant to be holy. He completely rewrote the song using the same tune but with very different words. He said, you must be compassionate just as your Father is compassionate. Compassion, not purity, according to Jesus, was the primary quality of God's holiness. To be holy was to be compassionate. And to be compassionate was to be womb-like or wombish. To be compassionate was to show others the love and care a mother has for the child to whom she's given birth. To feel a piece of our heart in the life of every person we encounter. To be compassionate, it's also to be life-giving, to be a generative person, as Father Richard Rohr puts it. We're called to bring life into environments we enter rather than take the life from those environments. Everything is spiritual. Compassion is the key. And finally, Jesus will teach that transformation is the goal. Transformation is the goal. What is the ultimate goal of Christianity? Or to put it a different way, what does it mean to be a Christian? For some, being a Christian means believing the right things. For many people, especially since the time of the Enlightenment, believing the right things about God, Jesus, people, the world, believing the right things has become the primary objective of the Christian faith and the primary mark of who true Christians really are. Do you believe the right things? To have it all figured out has, for many, become the primary goal of the Christian faith. To fully understand God, to fully understand humanity, and to define a clear and logical process by which God and humanity are to relate to each other is often seen by many as the primary objective of the Christian faith. So, things like systematic theologies, these multi-volume works that define and explain, at least according to Enlightenment reason and logic, what God is like and how God interacts with humanity, these things have become increasingly popular. Study Bibles like the famous Scofield Reference Bible, first published in 1909, have become the prized possession of many Christians because such Bibles with their notes and commentary explain exactly what to believe about everything from the date the world was created to exactly how and when the world would end, at least according to those authors of those study Bibles. Bible study movements for adults and children in many Christian circles have become popular, from Sunday school classes to vacation Bible schools to seminars and workshops, all designed to teach people what to believe, because some see the essence of Christianity as believing the right things. And there's much to commend about this understanding of Christianity. It is important to understand what one believes and thinks about things like God and Jesus, humanity, and the world. But at its core, is that what Christianity is really all about? Is that the goal of being a Christian? To believe the right things? It may surprise you to know that Jesus talked very little, if any, about a system of right beliefs. In fact, when he did so, it was usually in a condemning way. He did talk about the importance of believing in him and the things he taught, but what he taught was not a system of doctrines and ideas. Jesus did not write or teach a systematic theology. Jesus taught a system by which to live. Based on what Jesus taught, to be a Christian was not to have all the intellectually correct answers to questions of theology or doctrine. Nor was being a Christian defined by Jesus as simply following the right moral code. Now, a lot of us were raised to understand the goal of Christianity as doing, or more often, not doing certain things. I was raised in a tradition that taught that real Christians do not dance, because that's what Jesus taught, right? So in 9th grade, when the chorus was sponsoring a high school dance as a fundraiser for the music program, and all the members of the chorus were expected to be in attendance to help out, a significant crisis of faith was created for me. Could I attend this dance in good conscience as a Christian? Well, thanks to my parents' wise guidance and handling of this moment, I did attend the dance, and by the way, I had an amazing time. But it was not without some twinge of guilt that by my attendance, I was compromising my Christian faith. It seemed that I was violating the moral code that had been presented to me as the essence of my Christianity. I suspect some of you have similar stories. Now again, it might surprise you to know that Jesus talked little, if any, about following a moral code. In fact, when he did, it was usually in a critical way of a rigid legalism. Consider just one example. He says to the Pharisees and teachers of the law, "Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You give 1/10 of your spices, mint, dill, and cumin, which the moral law required them to do. But you have neglected the more important matters of the law: justice, mercy, and faithfulness. You should have practiced the latter without neglecting the former." The religious leaders that Jesus criticized were following the right moral code, They weren't going to the dances, but they were missing the matters which were of greater importance. In many ways, Jesus undoes the whole idea of a right moral code in his famous Sermon on the Mount when he repeatedly says, "You have heard that it was said, but I tell you." Well, what one did or how one acted formed a core part of Jesus' teaching. Obedience to the right moral code was not presented by Jesus as the goal or objective of following him. And receiving a ticket out of hell was not at the core of Jesus' teaching either. Despite how the message of Jesus in the Gospels has often been presented to us, Jesus says very little about hell or the afterlife for that matter. And what Jesus does say, arguably, has been somewhat questionably translated and interpreted by modern English versions of the Bible, which often seem to make Jesus say things to fit certain theological systems rather than to accurately convey what Jesus really said. Now, I'm sure I'm raising a lot of questions by that statement, which unfortunately we don't have time to address in this talk. But trust me, the statement I made is true. Jesus' teachings have often been reduced to a plan to avoid hell because such a presentation is very motivational and convincing. And following such teaching is relatively easy. The threat of eternal conscious torment is a quick way to produce converts. Who wouldn't want to join a movement that guaranteed that kind of outcome? And yet when one looks at everything the Gospels tell us Jesus said and taught, very little, if any, when honestly translated and interpreted, was about the avoidance of hell, even though Jesus did quite regularly and clearly talk about a life that was beyond this life. So if the core of Jesus' teaching was not about believing the right things or following a specific moral code or even about escaping hell, what was the core of Jesus' teaching? What was the goal of what he taught? What was the objective of following him? What was and is the essence of Christianity? Well, the question can be answered in one word: transformation. The transformation of the individual and the transformation of society. Consider the following. What was Jesus' primary request of his followers? Well, the answer is in the question itself, isn't it? Jesus' primary request of his followers was, "Follow me." Again and again in the Gospels, one reads words like this: "Come, follow me," Jesus said. Jesus invited his followers on a journey by which their lives would be transformed. This is what God has been doing with people from the beginning, calling them to embark on a journey of transformation. Abraham is to leave his homeland and embark on a journey in which he will be transformed. Moses is to lead the people of Israel out of Egypt on a journey through the wilderness to the promised land, a journey on which they will be transformed. The prophets call the Israelites to embark on a journey of return to the covenant, a journey that will transform them. The Israelites will be called to return from exile to their homeland, a journey of transformation. And Jesus will call his followers to a journey, a 3-year journey that will result in their lives being radically transformed. The journey will involve believing certain things and acting in certain ways and embracing the reality of eternal life. But those things will not be the goal of the journey. They will be components of achieving the goal. The goal will be a changed or transformed life. Jesus invites us on the same journey. The journey of our lives lived through the lens of Jesus' teachings. Everything is spiritual, compassion is the key, and transformation is the goal. Transformation from what to what? Transformed from people centered on ourselves to people who see ourselves as agents of God's work in the world, living fully into what it means to be the image of God, living fully led by the Spirit of God. Jesus called people to move from a small and limited understanding of themselves to a broad and expansive understanding of their life and existence as being transformative agents in the world. This journey of individual transformation would result in the transformation of society, the transformation of the world. Paul, the writer of much of the New Testament, described the marks or indicators of being on this transformative journey. Paul described these benchmarks, or better yet, waypoints, as the fruit of the Spirit. He says, but the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Against such things there is no law. Those who belong to Christ Jesus have crucified the flesh with its passions and desires. Since we live by the Spirit, let us keep in step with the Spirit. Let us not become conceited, provoking and envying each other. Those who belong to Christ, who are following Jesus on this journey, have crucified the flesh, or think the self or the ego, and instead are developing a great sense of love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Are those qualities growing in you? Are you being transformed into a person of greater love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control? This is the goal of following Jesus. It is not believing a list of the right doctrines or following the right moral code or being sure you have a ticket to get out of hell. The goal of following Jesus is the transformation of your life. The goal of following Jesus is to become a more loving, kind, patient, gentle, peaceful, and good person. And as you become that, you change the world. As you and I become people more and more guided by and empowered with the Spirit, people of greater love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control, we begin to act differently toward the people around us. That different approach toward the people around us has a transformational effect on them. And as those transformative effects become cumulative, they begin to be reflected in the culture as a whole. The church and its culture becomes a microcosm, a prototype, a representative sample of what can happen in culture as a whole as people begin to live with compassion, governed by the fruits of the Spirit in relationship to those around us. And think about the opportunity that is before us right now to live in that way. It's election season. And the worst of our culture is seen in our political discourse. From both sides, from every corner, the hatred, and that is what it is, pure evil, hatred, and discord is appalling. And Christians are not without blame. We quickly step off the transformational journey with Jesus when it comes to our political convictions and conversations, and we are as guilty of fueling the evil as anyone. No one is doing it differently. No one is modeling a different way. But we, as followers of Jesus, can model a different way, and we must model a different way. This is what Jesus calls us to do. What if we really, really believed that transformation was the goal and compassion was the key, because ultimate reality is not defined by a Democratic or Republican candidate, but by the spiritual reality of God? What if I took seriously the teaching of Jesus that called me to love my perceived enemies, because in loving them, they actually cease to be my enemies? And what if I started a personal discipline to practice this teaching of Jesus by praying daily for the political candidate that I will not vote for in November? That means if I'm a Democrat, I start praying regularly for Donald Trump, and if I'm a Republican, I start praying regularly for Kamala Harris. And I don't mean praying that they will change their ideas or platforms, or praying that they will lose the election. I mean praying for their well-being, their safety, their prosperity, their peace. Praying for them just like you would pray for your children. Remember, compassion? It sounds crazy, doesn't it? Ridiculous, I know. Radical, yes. Welcome to the teachings of Jesus. This is what it means to follow Him. This is what it means to be transformed. And then, what would it look like to take this idea one step further? At work, in your neighborhood, at school, think about that person who's of the other political persuasion. That person who has the yard sign of the candidate you oppose. What if you had the courage, the fortitude, the conviction to approach them and say something like this? I know we're voting for different people in this election, but our relationship, our friendship, my commitment to you is way more important to me than who will be in the White House this January. That's transformative. Act like that and then go ahead and vote on November 5th for whom you believe is the best candidate. Vote and watch the election returns with passion. But remember, if Kamala Harris or Donald Trump showed up at your door on election night and said, I'd like to watch the returns with you, you would eagerly invite them in and offer them the best meal you could provide and genuinely wish them well, because before you are a Democrat or a Republican, you are a follower of Jesus. And in Jesus' name, you see them and accept them and love them as precious people made by God and in the image of God, even if you don't agree with their political positions. And if you cannot envision yourself as being able to do that, then please do not call yourself a Christian. But if you would do that, as much as it would require you to get over yourself, to become an agent of the Spirit, doing something like that would change the awful and evil reality we witness among ourselves every time we listen to the news. Why don't we regularly do these things? Why do we consider such ideas as fanciful or absurd? Because we do not take the teaching of Jesus seriously. The goal of what Jesus taught was transformation. Are you committed to pursuing that goal?